Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout of the Living Income Guaranteed channel. And today we will be continuing a second part to a previous discussion called Homeopathy, the Best Kept Healing Secret. This is a subject that definitely aligns a lot in terms of how we view health within the context of Equal Life Foundation, our principles, our aim that we have as human beings to not only make of this world a better place, but also understand the causes of how we have come to where we are now. And we find it fascinating and really a pleasure to be able to speak again with the homeopathic consultant, Dr. David Kramer from the Hudson Valley School of Classical Homeopathy. We are very pleased to have you again to discuss these subjects. So welcome to the Hangout.
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be back again.
And we have also our co-host, Jean. So welcome, Jean, to the Hangout as well.
Hi, everybody. Thank you.
And we will be discussing for about, or most likely 40 minutes. This is a broad topic, and I would like you guys to know that there will be questions and comments that you can place for David throughout the Hangout, which if you happen to not be able to watch live, you can also place the same comments, questions on the YouTube video itself. So let's start with the continuation of our conversation, going more into the philosophical underpinnings of homeopathy. And there is this point of lawfulness. So let's start, David, with discussing what is the homeopathic understanding of lawfulness.
Well, thank you and hello, everybody. Lawfulness is basically that faculty that has governed the functioning of the universe for the last 14 billion years, and as you under those influences, gravity, cohesion, physical realities, and so the lawfulness that we see in physics and also the unseen realities are also considered lawfulness. So homeopathy takes the whole human being into consideration physically, as we know, which Western medicine or allopathic medicine subscribes to and embraces, but also mentally, emotionally, as well as spiritually, because that's part of the human experience. So homeopathy is a holistic medicine that follows all the governing laws that operate within the human organism.
What are some examples, David, of lawfulness in nature, say? Are you able to hear me?
Well,
Sorry.
Yes, of course, I can. So lawfulness in nature is actually the physical properties of physics that we can observe, as well as the non-physical properties that we can't observe directly but indirectly. So, for example, how is it that all the parts of this planet that we operate harmoniously and cooperatively, such that the organism of the planet Earth functions in a very admirable way with regard to how all species can coexist with one another, the human species being the only exception to the rule. But all the species coexist together very nicely, even when there's violence. And violence should not be viewed as something negative in that regard, like earthquakes or volcanoes, but necessary adjustments on the planet so other aspects can evolve and grow.
What happens when we veer from this lawfulness, and why have we as humans deviated from it?
Really very fundamental and important question. We have, unlike other species on the planet, we have what we would like to call free will. And free will allows us to make decisions about how we behave in our life, whereas other creatures don't have a great deal of control or desire for different types of behavior. They know who they are. A lion knows what a lion is, and a goldfish knows what a goldfish is, and doesn't make any distinction as to it should be something other. We having free will, which is the existential question, who am I, why am I here, and what, that sets human beings apart from other species. And so it's our understanding of what free will is, as it existed as questions from time immemorial, that sets us apart. And that's where the struggle is, because in our state of free will, we do not always abide with the lawfulness of harmony and cooperation. And that lawfulness of harmony and cooperation, excuse me, I believe was broken after we became an agrarian race of people, from the hunters and the gatherers, who just took whatever they could get and took care of the physical body with less emphasis on their spiritual, emotional, and mental state. But as we have grown from the agrarian to the industrial to the age of information, we have moved further apart from our direct relationship with that which is harmonious and cooperative.
So, given that situation, what would you say is the primary intention of homeopathic treatment?
The primary intention of it is to bring the four parts of the organism back into its correct correspondence. Hahnemann viewed disease or illness as the result of an imbalance of the different levels of functioning of the organism, Samuel Hahnemann being the founder of homeopathy. He called the disease a mistunement, very much like a stringed instrument that's out of tune. So whatever is played on that instrument that's out of tune is not going to sound very harmonious. And so he talks about the retuning of the human instrument, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And that's where the emphasis is in terms of homeopathic treatment, getting the four centers back in alignment again, such that the organism can function in the way that it was originally intended to function. It says in his magnum opus, The Organon of Medicine, the art of medicine, and the medicinal art, Hahnemann says in the first paragraph that the high and only mission of the physician is to restore the sick to health and to restore the sick, as it is termed. But it's interesting that he terms it not according to man, not according to man or to women or to society, but he terms it according to nature, that which nature had originally created the physical organism, and mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And great nature follows the lawfulness of some either universal law or for some divine law. And so it's according to determined, so that we comport ourselves in life in a way that's harmonious and cooperative, like all other things and creatures on the planet and in the universe.
Currently, in this society, we move more in the sense of what can I get, what is in it for me, instead of what can I give. So to me, that sounds like inequality, unbalance. So how do we know what real balance is?
Real balance is something that we innately know. This, as all other things have an innate way of knowing. The tree knows that it's a tree, if we can look at it that way. Any animal, any creature knows what it is. It doesn't deviate from that. It feels comfortable within its behavior and its routines, and we feel the same. When there's a correspondent in us of that which is harmonious and cooperative, we have a sense of well-being. dis-ease, if you separate those two words, is out of balance. And so when we feel out of sorts, physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually, then we are diseased. And the aim of homeopathy is to bring that mistunement back into correct relationship again.
So, David, when we talked earlier before the interview, we talked about how balance. You said balance is the achievement of one's purpose in life. Can you talk a little bit more about the importance and relevance of finding one's purpose and living one's purpose? And
yes, if everything that we see on the planet, apart from human beings, seems to have worked out in the last 4 billion years, which is the age of the planet Earth, seems to have worked out so that we have what we have, then the result must be seen that the combination of the multitudes of relationship, both animate and inanimate, has ended up with the result that's very beautiful and harmonious. We as human beings have the possibility to continue and participate in that actively and consciously. And when we veer off, when we become competitive with the planet or with each other or within ourselves, then the chain of harmony and cooperation is broken, and we feel ill at ease, diseased. And knowing what our purpose is, our innate reason for our being here, which all things have, allows us to feel correct in our existence and the way that we conduct our lives. And that sense of correctness is the inner compass of what makes us continue with a clear conscience, or to continue with anxiety or anger or fear, and so on and so forth.
So what is purpose in this case? How can you define it?
I'm sorry, one more time.
What is purpose and how can you define it?
Purpose is the sense of our accumulative relations within ourselves and a sense of well-being, not happiness. Happiness is a distortion of purposefulness. We live in a life in the West, at any rate, where we're told that, you know, the aim in life is to be happy, not to be purposeful. And I'm going to read paragraph 9 of what Hahnemann suggests is healthy in a human being. And I think it's really critical that we understand this is what our potential is as human beings. And he says, in the healthy condition of man, the spiritual vital force, the dynamis that animates the material body, rules with unbounded sway and retains all the parts of the organism in admirable, harmonious, vital operation as regards both sensations as well as functions, so that our indwelling, reason-gifted mind can freely employ this living, healthy instrument for the higher purposes of our existence. Hahnemann states, as does other alternative therapeutics, Chinese, Ayurvedic medicine, and so forth, state that there's a purpose for us to be here. And one of the main reasons, not the only one certainly, but one of the main reasons that we suffer in the way that we suffer is because we have not followed that which is innately pure and healthy in us. And as a consequence, our physical body or our mental or our emotional or spiritual state needs to feel uncomfortable in order to get our attention to bring some relief and understanding as to why we're suffering. Because suffering doesn't exist in a vacuum. More often than not, there's a reason behind it. Sometimes it's just our genetic predisposition, which we can't avoid. But all the other sufferings, and many of the other sufferings, have to do with our lack of understanding, our lack of going deeper into who we are and what place we hold in our lives with regard to ourselves and others and the planet.
Thank you. That was very informative. So this would come under the category of lawfulness, that we have to find our purpose, and within that, illness that comes up also has a purpose. So everything has a purpose, including illness. Can you expand a little bit on that, the purpose of illness?
Yes. Because everything in the universe has its place and its purposefulness, illness is part of that. And when things are not going correctly, the lawfulness of the universe has created a mechanism basically to get our attention. And disease, physical, mental, and emotional and spiritual disease, is something that is recognized within ourselves. It's acknowledged within ourselves as something that's not cooperative, that's not harmonious, that's out of balance, and very often painful, physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. And it's that innate knowing that something is going wrong or not functioning correctly that gets our attention. Is very much like the engine light of your car that goes on and informs you that there's something wrong with the engine. When the light goes on, there's nothing wrong with the dashboard or the light. It's an indication that some other function of the car is not functioning well, and it needs to be attended to. That's the purpose. And if you were to stop on the side of the highway after your engine light goes on and call up AAA or a trouble truck, and a mechanic comes by and pops the hood and says, turn over, and you do, and the light goes on, and he says, okay, turn off the engine, and he makes a couple of noises and clunks around a while the hood is up, and then closes the hood and say, turn it on again, and you turn it on and it's not on. You feel relieved and make the assumption that the problem has been fixed, when in fact most therapeutics, conventional therapeutics, are really cutting the wire from the engine to the light on the dashboard. And that's why it's no longer on. It's not that the problem has been resolved. Otherwise, people would not have to go through the repeated kinds of suffering that they go through for much of their lives, especially at the end of their lives.
There is a question that there is coming up right now. There's a repetition on the noise. Sorry. Yeah. So she's saying, this is from Marzana, and she's saying, hello, would you say that there is no disease, which through homeopathy could not be cured or resolved? It might be a long process, but possible process? Thank you for your time.
We need to create a new paradigm of understanding on multiple levels. Anyone who's participating in this now feels strongly that things are not well for the planet, for individuals. So to answer the question, homeopathy doesn't treat diseases like conventional medicine treats diseases. They diagnose a cancer, a kidney problem, a lung functioning, a respiratory functioning, a stroke, and so on and so forth. Homeopathy treats people who happen to be suffering with certain kinds of diagnosed diseases. So we don't treat the disease per se, But the person, unless they were born with the disease, and most people have not been born, at some point did not have the disease. So we bring the person back to the level that they had prior to the need of the disease showing up, and that's how we're able to treat diseases. If we eradicate the cause of the disease, the disease symptoms will go away. Very much like if there's an issue about heroin or crack, and you keep closing down the crack houses or the heroin houses, they're just going to spread up somewhere else. Homeopathy does, it using that metaphor, where people have no need to use drugs. If people have no need to use drugs, how long would the crack houses remain open? So we get rid of the cause of the disease, and the cause of the disease exists within the individual, not in the diagnosis of the disease symptoms. That's a major difference between homeopathic medicine and allopathic or Western medicine.
Thank you for your answer and clarification there. She's also asking if one would like to study homeopathy, would you recommend schools or a teacher where one would go to study? So we will leave links to precisely your school, David. Is that correct?
That would be correct and appreciated. The wonderful thing about studying homeopathy is you don't need to have what we've understood as a medical degree to see the symptoms. We need real training, without a doubt, but we don't have to study the deepest levels of anatomy, physiology, pathology, although those are certainly valuable courses of study. But the disease doesn't start from the microbe. It doesn't start with the virus or the bacteria. It's when vital force is weakened that the bacteria and the virus can have its way. So the thing is not to fight the virus and the bacteria. The thing is to strengthen the vital force on all levels, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, so that the bacteria and the virus cannot get a foothold in the organism, or if it does, that it's eradicated very quickly.
David, what happens if someone is too sick to realize their purpose? They come to you and they're already in severe illness. What can homeopathy do to help such a patient?
Well, homeopathy can manage the case such that they come to an understanding of compassion within themselves, an internal healing where the anger, the anxieties, the fears are greatly diminished. A case that I had in the 1990s who was a playwright in New York City, very angry, a young man, and his body was too far gone. There had been too much deterioration on a cellular level. But he lived 3 times longer than the doctors had given a prognosis, and he died without the anger. He died without the hostility. He was an artist. He would draw very angular types of black and white geometric shapes with little drops of blood coming out of those. And he did that for years, and that was his way of artistically demonstrating what he felt internally. And toward the end of his life, he started painting with watercolors and started painting pansies and did a study of hundreds of pansies that were happy and joyful. And his personality shifted in the last months of his life so that he died knowing why he was here and joyful, and without resentment, without regret, without anxiety, fears, and feeling like he had participated in the world in the short time that he had in the best way that he could.
So if disease is the departure of our life purpose, how can we find and live our purpose?
An excellent question. I think the first thing that we need to understand is that there is such a thing as a purpose. There's a wonderful story from the Sufi tradition, and it goes as a great master, and it's a true story, used to teach through humor. And in the 12th century, he was outside his house looking on the ground for something, and a disciple came along and said, "Master, what are you looking for?" And he said, "I'm looking for the key to my house." The house, metaphorically, the inside to his purposefulness. But literally, they were looking outside, so they were both on the ground looking for the key to his house. And after a half an hour of unsuccessful effort, another disciple came along and said to the first disciple, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm helping the master look for the key to his house." And all three of them are on the ground in the summer sun, sweating, looking for the key to the house. And after another half an hour, the master and said, "Master, where did you last see the key to your house?" And the master thought for a moment and said, "The last place I saw the key to my house was inside my house." And the disciple said, "What the hell are we looking out here for?" And he says, "Well, it's much too dark in there." The meaning that we're always looking outside to find the meaning of our lives. The first prerequisite is to acknowledge that we've been looking in the wrong place, even with the right intention, which is how the road to hell is paved. But even with the right intention, if we want something more meaningful, we need to find out how can we start to look in a meaningful way to find the right solution to the answer.
Why would you say that it's so difficult in this culture, and particularly in this culture, to find our purpose? Why isn't it self-evident?
Well, we live in this paradigm state of not actually understanding that a purpose is a beneficial thing. We go to school, and when I was a younger man, I went to school and took the subway and said, to get a good job, get a good education. The whole idea of money being a desirable thing, large amounts of money being better than small lotteries, and so on and so forth. All the external realities of materialism is the paradigm that we live on, that we should acquire, that we should get for ourselves, that we should have more than we need, and that we need not share with others, that finders keepers, losers weepers is a saying that I grew up with. And so we have to change that paradigm. There's an interesting story from a border town in Texas where a migrant farm worker was sitting on a park bench one day finishing his lunch, and he threw his paper bag in the garbage, and he picked up another paper bag that he was going to toss in the garbage that was sitting on the bench with him, and he looked inside because it was heavy, and it was filled with money. There was $17,000 in money in that paper bag, and because of the wrappers on the $1,000 notes, he went to the bank where it was given out, and it turns out that that money was left there on the park bench by an older man who took out most of his life savings to buy a new truck and left it on the bench, and so the migrant worker returned it, and when he was asked by a reporter why he returned it rather than keeping it himself, he just very matter-of-factly looked at the reporter and he said, "Well, it wasn't mine." And then the reporter went around the town asking people, telling them the same scenario. People said that they would keep it. And so that kind of attitude, that someone will suffer and that if I find it, I'll keep it, or if I can push somebody out of a job, or if I can do something to get an advantage by manipulation. All these attitudes, physically, psychologically, all this shows that we're living in the wrong paradigm that we wish to acquire rather than we wish to share.
And also that this is like the bedrock, or this is the foundation of how disease is created, this misunderstanding of what our needs really are.
Correct. And it's embedded in the educational system. It's embedded in our entertainment system. It's embedded in the fabric of our life. And it's just the wrong paradigm shift. So much so that that we see what's happening to the planet. I'm very much not concerned for the well-being of the planet Earth. I think the planet Earth will get through whatever is going through with global warming in the same way that it got through 60 million years ago with the meteors that extinguished the dinosaurs. And it may take billions of years, but it'll get through it. What's happening is the planet Earth is no longer seeing human beings as wanting to be the gracious host that it's been for tens of thousands of years. And to the folks up here, that when I have a discussion, I have a hound dog that's got a bunch of fleas that they're itching all the time, and after a while, well, the hound dog can't get rid of all the fleas, it'll just jump in the pond and drown them all. And so that's what I see global warming is happening. We're not hurting the planet so much because it has its corrective mechanisms. What is happening is that we're making it inhospitable for us to live here, and that's our own doing. So this chat is an indication that there's an acknowledgement that something needs to be corrected. And you're doing this, and it's also being done in different parts of the world, mostly in Europe, where they're having a guaranteed income for low-income individuals.
And precisely on that note, before we started the hangout, we started discussing on what living income would do in our society, and also how it would be like part of this healthy living process, so to speak. So what would be your comment on that?
The need to have a living income is critical for survival, are established now on the planet. We have two modes of possibility of existence. We have survival mode, and we have the mode where we can thrive. That mode of thriving represents another possibility for our being, but we cannot move into the mode of thriving and take care of the necessaries. Food, clothing, shelter, safety, these are all necessary. And so without that, we can't really entertain higher and more refined possibility to care of the basics, and the basics survived unnecessarily to literally billions of our brothers and sisters on the planet.
So David, would you say that the message, the role of the homeopath is to help us correct our course? It shows that we're seeking happiness instead of meaning. And could you elaborate more on the difference between those two things?
Well, happiness is a confusion. It's not that happiness in and of itself has a negative value. It's just not complete. I would prefer to think that joyousness and inner contentment is preferable over what we perceive as happiness. Happiness is very much like feeling a little run down and eating a chocolate bar. And you get a rush of energy, and after that rush of energy is exhausted, then the consequence of eating the sugar is also the individual, and there's no benefit, as opposed to moving to a healthy, clean diet of mostly clean food and health foods, and not eating junk food, where the body that was designed to eat clean food from its inception will operate more harmoniously. We take better care of our cars by changing the oil and doing the necessary maintenance than, for the most part, that we take care of ourselves. And we take better care of our VCRs or whatever it is that we're using. We learn more about the maintenance of our gadgets than the maintenance of our existence. And it's a distortion of where the priorities need to be set.
So in contrast to the allopathic doctor, the homeopath's job is to help the patient to understand its true nature of this imbalance. So what values within the patient are out of balance, that's what the job of the homeopath does. Is this correct? And also, what would be the difference with allopathic pharmaceuticals and the approach of homeopathy in this case?
Well, again, this is a very large question. The homeopath needs to develop him or herself to the highest degree possible in the course of their lives, because if we are moving away from our purpose, or we're not in contact with our purpose, then the homeopath themselves need to know what their purpose is. And even in that first aphorism by Hahnemann, the high and only mission of the physician, or the homeopath in this case, one as a practitioner needs to know their high and only mission, their purposefulness in life, which means that they have to develop themselves to some degree, either in terms of a certain level of refinement or spiritually, because if you don't understand the nature of what purposefulness, how could you possibly address that in someone who's suffering from a lack of purposefulness, but they only have a skin rash? Or you're always going to assume that the problem with the patient is the skin rash, rather than the fact that there's an internal itch that's erupting and it's only manifesting on the skin. So the difference between a homeopathic practitioner or any other healing individual, any other healer, is to be able to know all the degrees of complexity and relationship on the physical, the mental, the emotional, and spiritual realm, and then to be able to see where that disease is manifesting in the person by extrapolating what the symptoms are, so that one can find the way back to the source of what the problem is. People, for example, get migraine headaches because they have stress. And so they'll go to the doctor and they'll say, you know, I have headaches, and the doctor will prescribe this medication or that medication, and it temporarily will very much help the headache, or will relieve the symptoms of the headache. But because the cause has not been eliminated, those headaches get worse and become more progressive and get deeper, and therefore the individual ultimately gets no relief from the stronger and stronger medication. So we have to find out what causes the stress and why it manifests at the level of headaches, and then the headaches will go away. Without addressing the headache, you get rid of the cause, then the result will be eliminated. And the whole idea about the pharmaceutical industry is also a very large subject, but the bottom line is they're looking to find a way to give temporary relief to people's symptoms rather than looking for the cause of why the symptoms are arising in the first place. And in fairness, sometimes it's absolutely necessary to give pharmaceuticals, and I would not disagree with that. And sometimes it's necessary to do surgery, and I would not disagree with that. But the word necessary is the idea that we have to see whether it's actually necessary or not. So if someone has, say, chronic migraines from stress, then any kind of stressful job they have will give them stress. But why do they get stressed? Well, maybe they perceive things in a distorted way. If you can treat them for their distortion, which in turn creates the stress, then the elimination of the distortion of how they perceive things is a cure to the case rather than addressing the actual headaches. And the pharmaceuticals have no interest in going in that direction at all. They don't want to find the causal factors. They only want to basically give relief, which we can say is suppression. In fact, there are some claims by some pharmaceutical companies that literally say it's all about suppression. And they take pride in that, which is a bit disconcerting. But homeopathy and other therapeutics want to find the cause and to eliminate the cause and then get rid of the manifestation as a result.
So that's a great overview. That's a great overview of classical homeopathy versus the sort of health food store version that people think that they're getting homeopathy when they go into a health food store and they have a headache and they get a homeopathic remedy for the headache. Can you just talk a little bit about what that distortion has become? Because that is not really the root. That's not the classical approach that you're talking about. What you're talking about is a much more in-depth relationship with the patient, and it's a complete paradigm shift from going to the health food store when you have a headache and getting a remedy. And yet that's presented as homeopathy.
Yes, it's quite true, and unfortunately, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, insists that on homeopathic remedies of what the main function of the remedy is, which is completely absurd, since for most remedies there are thousands of different symptoms that any one remedy could address. So they'll say, well, this remedy is theoretically good for headaches, and something is good for menstrual cramps, and people will go and, because the healthy part of them wants not to use conventional drugs and chemicals and put that into their system, they will find themselves using homeopathic remedies with some very extraordinarily limited description of what it is, but it still comes from the paradigm of, I have this thing that's bothersome, I want to get rid of the thing. And we call that therapeutic prescribing. Headaches, nausea, menses, whatever, hay fevers, bee stings. And temporarily, it may be perfectly fine to give a therapeutic remedy for an acute or initial discomfort, but it will never cure the case. Most of the time, all of those remedies cause. So it's like slapping on some sort of steroid on eczema. The eczema will disappear from the skin. However, because according to the laws of physics, energy cannot be destroyed, if the skin eruption of the eczema is no longer there from putting on the steroids, it will go to some deeper interior part of the organism that's a more important organ than the skin, because the skin is an organ. So it may travel to the liver, is the filter of the human body. So the liver will start to acquire all that energy and all those steroids, and complications can arise. So when people go to health food stores, they have the right idea about using non-chemical, which homeopathy is non-chemical, but they have the wrong concept, which is we want to just get rid of the symptom rather than getting a cure to the dis-ease of the whole organism.
Right. Thank you.
So how does homeopathy view the allopathic medical treatment of psychological disorders?
I didn't hear the last part, but how does homeopathy view psychological?
The allopathic treatment that is given to psychological disorders. So how does homeopathy see it?
Well, just like with any physical approach, mentally and emotionally, the allopathic point of view is basically the same, of suppressing. So giving Ritalin, for example, to school children who have an imbalance in their system, for my perception, and there's plenty of evidence to support that, even though this has become a very political hot wire from vaccinations, the numbers of children that now need Ritalin, the allopathic approach, the conventional medical approach, is to basically dumb down the emotions of the hyperactive student to make them more cooperative, so that the teacher has an easier time and doesn't have to discipline a student that is misbehaving in class due to a philosophy and a paradigm that's created that all vaccinations, and that's a very complex topic in and of itself. But having been a special ed teacher for almost a dozen years, I can tell you the students who are on Ritalin have lost some level of their naturally healthy organic functioning, and they are not functioning at their optimal level, and you will easily concede that their behavior is inappropriate, but the Ritalin is basically given to manage the classroom, not to actually address the problems of the student. And that's done so teachers can teach, and we can have what I call the continuation of miseducation, because that miseducation paradigm, or the unhealthy paradigm that we currently live under.
David, can you talk a little bit about what the actual medicine, the nature of the medicine that the homeopath uses? What are the substances? I know it's a huge topic, but if you could give us a general idea of what substances do you use actually in treating?
Well, all homeopathic remedies are made from naturally occurring substances, botanical, plant, gases, the majority coming from botanicals and from plants, and even some from animals. And so they're all naturally occurring, because everything that we are a microcosm of the planet Earth. The Earth is composed of 76% water. We're composed of 76% water. We have all the natural elements that exist in the planet Earth in our bodies, and to the same proportion. The reason that something is wrong and becomes diseased is based on the reality that everything that exists is vibrational and energetic. And so homeopathy is nothing more than an energy that addresses an energetic imbalance in the organism. And so all the remedies are when given conscientiously and correctly, but because it is medicine, it is not absolutely safe when given incorrectly. And this is something that the homeopathic community needs to acknowledge as well. They would like everybody to believe that every homeopathic remedy that's given is safe, there's no side effects, and that's actually not true, because if a remedy is given too frequently and it's the wrong remedy, the absolutely wrong remedy, it will create what's called a proving. And a proving is what homeopaths use to determine what the right remedy is, by intentionally having scientific double-blind experiments in giving a substance in a remedy form that's scientifically created to a number of people involved in the experiment, and by giving them this remedy intentionally, knowing that they will for a short period of time acquire symptoms that don't ordinarily belong to themselves, then when someone who has those symptoms as a disease, we happen to know what remedy to give. But when remedies are given without any real consciousness, and they're incorrect remedies, and they're given over a prolonged period of time, then there are consequences. Because as a great teacher once said, every stick has got two ends. And if homeopathy is strong enough to cure, it's strong enough to create problems if used improperly.
Currently, we're living in very difficult times in our lives. It appears as if we live lacking reason in this world. What's your perspective on this? Are we too far gone?
Well, we're certainly having a difficult time. That may qualify me for being a master of understatement. But in reality, a show like this, people getting healthier, the fact as Westerners don't really understand that there are other populations in the world that are healthier than we are, that there are movements afoot, whether they're publicized or not, represent something healthier, that there are teachings on the planet that instruct people to move to a more refined level of existence, that we should try to find our purpose, that they employ techniques and methodologies that nurture individuals, that reject coarseness and try to create refinement. So a lot exists on the planet. We may not hear these voices because they're in third world countries or underdeveloped countries. We tend to think in the West that an underdeveloped country is at a disadvantage. And if you follow the paradigm of more is better and that possessing is better than sharing, then if you use that as a criteria, they are. But if you go to certain places in the world where people are more authentic about their existence, there are experiences in human behavior that we're not privy to that sort of make me feel, having had and been fortunate to have such experiences, that real humanity exists in many parts of the planet. But the overwhelming majority of information we get says that that's not the case. And while it may be the case that we are overpowering the healthier part of the planet, there are groups of individuals in terms of spiritual teachings, religious teachings, programs like this that are looking for answers and are trying to redirect and course correct the direction that we're going down. And because we are so, we're under the propaganda of multinational corporations that have a an axe to grind and a perception to offer. There's a sense of hopelessness, and I would encourage people not to be, but to practice those things about the purposefulness of their lives and to find health that would counter the kind of insurgence of selfishness and greed that's caused things politically to happen in the way they have.
David, we've talked, and you've mentioned that the symptom that people come to you for is depression. Is that a particularly Western problem?
I think it's more common in the West than in other parts. The depression is the consequence of the lack of acquisition and the problems associated with acquisition. If you are financially challenged and poor, and you're living in a difficult situation, and I'm not talking in the most bereft of situations. Middle America is in that situation where they feel a sense of hopelessness, a despair for themselves, for their families. They feel that things are getting worse over time, and given the current politicals in this 2016 presidential race, we can see a lot of people, both left of center and right of center, who are feeling this sense of hopelessness and despair. And so people come to me because they feel that the paradigm is not working for them, that they can't be happy. And since they've bought into that paradigm of, I want to be happy, I want my kids to be happy, which is an organic thing, that they want something better for their children, but they never, in the schools, we never talk about meaningfulness. We only talk about happiness. So people come in because they haven't gotten what they've been taught they need to have, which is the acquisition. That's where the paradigm shift can begin. You don't have to be happy. What we do need to have is a sense of fulfillment. When we look at all the great individuals that have inhabited this planet in our lifetimes, they have not had things that they acquired. All the great teachers, from modern day saints like Mother Teresa back to Moses and Buddha and Jesus and Lao Tzu and Muhammad, no one acquired anything, but they had a sense of purpose. And we emulate all of those wonderful individuals, both male and female. But when we look at them, why don't we emulate the fact that they didn't need to acquire, that they were humble, that they knew their place and purpose in life? So we go to whatever religious organization that we go to, and we say that this individual is a great individual, and then we get in our good cars or not so good cars, and we drive away, and then we look for something to eat, and we forget the fact that the way they conducted their lives is the very reason that we aspire to be like them. But then we forget that once we leave that sanctuary of where they are acknowledged and revered, we forget what they're really about. We forget a need to share, a need to have compassion. There are many scientific studies that show that there's a God in the brain. There's a righteous place in the brain, and that it can be developed, but it needs to be developed through compassion and through meditation. There's scientific evidence that can prove that we have faculties that we can develop for something more refined, and we don't do that. And that's the failing of in the world today, for the most part. But we should not believe that everything is just falling apart, because in those areas that we're not aware of, they're not falling apart. They live by a different kind of law and a different kind of reality, and they don't have television.
Mm-hmm.
and they don't have computers, and some places don't even have roads. But there are other options in the world. We just need to open our perception of reality and ask ourselves, is this really all it really is? And the answer very simply is no.
Absolutely, there is much more for us ourselves as humans to be able to contribute back to our world, to really develop our purpose. And it's definitely now clear that homeopathy is quite a point that can assist us precisely in understanding that. So very much aligned, in essence, with our principles as Equal Life Foundation. And I thank you very much for our discussion today. We have comments saying, thank you for this discussion. This is a great hangout from Marzana. Thank you, Marzana. We will leave also links to the school that David is also a founder of, so that you can be aware of, because she was asking where she can study homeopathy. So thank you very much. Jean, any last point? Otherwise, we will wrap up.
No, just thank you so much for sharing this and showing us that there are that there's support out there. We just have to find the right homeopath when we're confronted with illness. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you, David, and thanks to you, the viewer. If you have any other extra questions, place them in the YouTube comments. See you next week. We will continue with this discussion on schools and purpose and meaningfulness also created at the level of our first years of education. So be
Great.
up for that. See you guys. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.